down. Let's make it our business. A climate podcast that's about innovators, change makers, and entrepreneurs who are taking actions, creating solutions, and inspiring many. This podcast is supported by US Department of State, created by BBC Media Action, India.
Did you know, according to UNPFII, World Bank and Conservation International, there are an estimated 476 million indigenous people around the world spread across 90 countries. That's about 6% of the global population. But here is the thing. This 6% protects 80% of the world's biodiversity. Now think about that for a second. Hello and welcome to Cool It Down. Today we're exploring how communities play a vital role in protecting our natural resources through stewardship. What makes these collective efforts so impactful, and how can we all join in, whether we are living in a small village or a busy urban neighborhood? To help us unpack these ideas, we have Pranab Ranjan with us, a passionate advocate who has worked hands-on with communities to drive positive environmental change. Pranab, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, and thanks for sharing this platform to share our work about community stewardship, particularly at the context when climate is changing fast and also climate action is becoming more relevant.
So Pranab, let's start simple. What makes community stewardship so effective when it comes to conserving resources like forests?
If you look at present climate action debate, there is already a growing recognition globally that wherever the indigenous people and local communities, which we call them IPLC now, are living globally, mostly on the highlands, hills, forested areas, we find these areas have best biodiversity and higher forest cover. So globally it is told that almost 60% of global biodiversity as well as almost 30% of global carbon is stored in the areas where these communities live, where they live in a small, comparatively much smaller areas. And now, while there is a global recognition in COPs after COPs, this climate, the conference of parties, there is very less understanding why is it so. And while trying to understand that, while we use the word stewardship quite often, we try to look at theories and research behind this, and we realize three things. The ethics of care, their intrinsic traditional knowledge, as well as the agency, which like local agency, local decentralized agency to have a tenure rights over their ecosystem. So these three things together really decide how communities better conserve or steward nature. So wherever the stewardship is better, we find the conservation is better outcomes. Where stewardship is less, we found the outcomes are not much.
Great. So, I mean, it's out there that communities, when they are in action and they are, working towards something, we have better results. And you have seen a lot of communities in action. Can you share a story where a community made a big difference in taking care of nature?
Yeah, there are like many stories. To give you a bigger example, Northeast India. Northeast India, we always curse this community that these communities in Northeast India do zooming, what we call shifting cultivation. And zooming is treated as a kind of very bad practice because people put fire to the forest and forest is burnt. So I as a scientist in forestry, when I studied forestry, we were told that this is a very bad practice. But if you look at Northeast overall, still, despite this zooming over last thousands of years and continuing to so in recent years, Northeast overall have a 70% of forest cover.
That's right.
Northeast India is the known as the hottest biodiversity hotspot in the world, the Indo-Myanmar region.
Yes.
Why is it so? When the rest of India is not practicing zooming, is less than 20% forest cover. So zooming is a practice which is close to nature. The way they burn the forest because they want to grow food in that area, and there is a tropical hill slope which is soil is acidic. There is no flat land. So to grow the crop, they have to get some land. And to get some land, they clear the forest. And when they burn the trees clear, the ashes are rich in alkalite. They're alkalite, calcium and magnesium more. So they make the soil neutral and make the fertilizer, fertility available to the crops. And they grow a lot of, they raise a lot of crops there. They don't raise only one crop. There are documentation that when they raise crop, the crops could be 40 to 15 number in a small patch of land, and which are very effectively and efficiently use water, soil nutrient, solar light, and they produce maximum biodiversity, and they get rich nutritional food out of that. And in 2 to 3 years, when the fertility go down, they stop it and they move to different place. And when they stop it, the fallowing start. When fallowing start, forest regenerate, and you'll be amazed to know, and I have seen that in the first 2 years of fallow produce almost 40% of their food, because in northeast most of their foods are also come from forest, like leafy vegetables, bush meat, tubers, so a lot of food. So that is how they have been, and then they moved on, and then they come back. So this is a traditional practice where they and as per our Constitution of India, they have the agency. So the land owners are the local communities. So forest department, not the state, own the land there. They have been living there for thousands of years. So they know the knowledge about which tree to cut, which tree to retain, how to cut, how to retain, and also what crops to grow. And they intimately live with the nature, so they care the nature. They do land husbandry, forest husbandry. So this combination of care, knowledge, and agency is really leading to a very symbiotic practice where forests are there, food is there, and people are there, and biodiversity is continuing. So this is something.
And Pranab,
Please go ahead.
No, I really wanted to ask you at this juncture, because you mentioned the word care, and certain things, they seem very obvious, but we seldom think about it. And I want to ask this: why do you think communities care so much about their environment? Do you think it's a part of their culture, that is the reason, or there is necessity, that's the reason, or is there something more?
Yeah, there is. I think all these things and little more about that. Recently, in a conference we organized, there is a young tribal poet come journalist called Jacinta Karkata from
she's a very good friend of mine.
Good.
Yes.
So Jacinta was there. So Jacinta was reciting a poem, and that touched everybody's heart. And she was telling, and let me translate it. She was telling that a young girl is asking her grandmother, the tribal grandmother in Jharkhand, "Oh, my grandmother, you go to the forest, you forest the forest, you go up and down in the hill, move around the forest, come back in the late evening with just a headload of fuel wood. Why is it so?" So now this grandmother tells the daughter, "Oh, my dear daughter, see, I go up and down the hill, I walked around because I want to forest only dry woods, only dead woods. I don't want to cut a tree. If I want to cut a tree, I could come back home in just 1 hour. But I am just..."
Wow.
So this is about care, because this grandmother cared the forest. So I think what Jacinta told epitomizes the point of care. So we have seen how when women go to forest, and most of the women, that's feminine forestry, women go to forest and collect NTFP. So they never harm the trees. They will be collecting dead woods. They will be collecting fallen fruits. They'll be shaking the trees and collect. They never cut a tree to collect fruit or and whenever they will collect tubers, they will be leaving aside small piece of tuber so that it regenerates. So this is so, and this is coming because, and we call it when there is a care and knowledge, there is something called ethics coming, because ethics is a combination of care and knowledge. When there is a care and agency, there is a motivation. So many times this care is embedded in their culture, embedded in their the way they live life in the forest. For example, if I just add another quote, Verrier Elwin, the great anthropologist who wrote about the tribal livelihoods and tribal culture about India.
Right.
He had told, when a Kant look at a forest standing on the hilltop, he feels that there is no tomorrow for him. He should not worry about tomorrow, because as long as the forest is there, so his life is secure. So that's why he cares the forest, because he knows that the forest need to be there, because and they have the knowledge to care the forest. But when we as outsiders, scientists, managers of forest, as government officials, or the industrialists go to the forest, we see forest as a resource. We see forest as something we manage, and many times we don't understand those values. So that's why when we manage the forest, we definitely get some resource, but we create a lot of externalities. The whole biodiversity goes down, ecosystem services goes down, and the climate change, no, we're looking at. So that is something I think, unless you look at the ethics of care, the introducing traditional knowledge and agency, which this grandmother
Yeah.
epitomizes, no, in Jacinta's story, I think we are missing out the forest people connections.
And it's such a beautiful way of explaining the way you have explained it, and I completely understand that, when I am born in a house, I mean, we just take an example of our homes. We take birth here and then we grow up, and then, whenever we want to feel secured, there is home. So we develop a kind of relationship with home, and that's exactly, I think, the communities which grow up, which take birth in the lap of nature, and every need is satisfied. There is a relationship that they develop with the environment, and that relationship is what they honor, even when maybe those trees, maybe those that land stops giving, they are there to honor it. So I guess it's a beautiful way of having a relationship, and that's exactly what we need to learn, that Mother Nature is giving us so much. We need to honor that relationship. Pranab, stewardship isn't just about rural areas. How can people in cities take up these ideas? And I'm sure it's going to be a little difficult because we hardly see nature, we hardly touch and feel nature. So it's going to be a little difficult for us in urban areas to develop that kind of relationship. But what's that one simple thing someone living in a city could start with, maybe?
Very true. I think you have indirectly told it while responding to it. For example, this forest people relationship, the nature people relationship, the way people nature understand each other and try to connect. So it is an interaction. Many times we have seen it as an interference. So many times we have disconnected from us, like from nature. The way we live in cities, we try to close ourselves from the nature. We go inside rooms, we have ACs, we have AC vehicles. We always feel more comfort in our our zone, and now everybody look at their own space. But if you look at villages, nature, it is a collective space. So this is like actually when you look at individualized space and collective space, you have to understand many times you can also have individual space in a collective space. For example, in Meghalaya, when women goes to forest, they feel more freedom because forest is there. There is no patriarchy. Nobody is there to not tell them something. So I think we have to see how we bring in those kind of value systems in cities. For example, if you look at when we talk about green cities, when you talk about more eco-friendly cities, we talk about waste recycling, plastic reduction. We talk about roof gardens, balcony garden. So these are again a more individual kind of thing, which is very important, which at a very individual level. But there are a lot of collective spaces, a lot of urban commons. For example, why people in Mumbai are fighting for that forest? Why in South Delhi, when a tree it caught, people are worried about that? So I think there is also something. So we have to reconnect to nature. I think in some schools, people are going for river walk. Students are taken to forest for walk. So we have to see that how we reconnect, because unless you reconnect with nature, unless you know about nature, unless you feel nature is my own, the care won't come. As you know, care, knowledge, agency are interlinked. So I think something which we can start with, how to know nature. How to know in our lives, like maybe when you go to a park, I just go to jog and come back, hearing a earphone, or just try to hear the bird sound, look at the trees, look at how the dew is fallen there, try to understand how the termites are growing inside where the mushrooms are coming up. So probably sometimes we don't look at that. We are too busy with our own space and our own. So I think as a student, as a professional, as a human being, we have to see how we can reconnect with nature. And there are many ways to do that. It can be a morning walk.
Oh yes,
exactly.
There are many ways. Absolutely. The way you've said, I mean, you've got to have a will. And I think one very simple way of doing it, living in cities, is if we can just adopt a tree, which is near us, and develop a relationship with that tree. Maybe name it, maybe take care of it, maybe, every day say hi to it.
Exactly.
And that way we will be able to develop a relationship with a tree, and then maybe with birds, then maybe with, a whole lot of things. But yeah, that will has got to be there. And that's the promise that as individuals we need to do with our climate, with our environment. Pranab, do you think businesses can benefit from these stewardship ideas? Like, could someone start a business focused on recycling or energy efficiency and make a difference?
No, very much. Two ways. One is that now the whole climate change becoming a reality. Climate action is imperative. So it is no more now. We should try to do it. We must do it. So now this is, if you don't do it, it is a question of survival. So for business, there are two things. One is business are increasing talking about sustainability, ESG. So big businesses are trying to. So maybe when you adopt a tree, some business can support you. So like for example, so far businesses were all around the rationalize of behind profits. But now we are increasingly seeing that when the social value is created, people are willing to pay for that. When ecological value is created, people are willing to pay for that. So how can we make now new businesses like, in the stock exchange board of India, social structures is coming. So people are trying to sit. So now I think businesses are also think that there is a business in socio-ecological systems. So how and how must we, how the investment, how the finances, and how the corporate governance is aligned around that. So that is something coming up, and a lot of people are working around that. So when people like either cities more increasingly interacting with nature, whether business will hire those people more and to set up their offices there more. So that is one way of looking, defining business. Second thing, as you told, how to bring in entrepreneurship. So again, entrepreneurship could be both ways, collective and individual, like more green entrepreneurship. For example, can we create more local seed varieties available? So like people are going for now, a lot of people are going to Insta and Facebook and Twitter showing their balconies, gardens. But when they show it, they're showing something which is very mundane. So can we bring back those chilies? Can you start growing Assamese, this bhoot jalakia in the garden and so on. So how to bring in more biodiversity into our space? How to bring in more local varieties and how to think about recycling, about simple things. Can we create value chains? Can you create supply chains with the youth, with the local, even our friends, slum dwellers who are there? Can we create value chains which are more inclusive and more green, where we are creating new market opportunity, new products? Like vermicompost were coming up. Like now we are everywhere talking about Amrit Pani, where the cow urine, cow dung, you mix it. So can we create those opportunities in cities so that they are, even we can have rural urban connections, peri-urban, rural. So we have to look at how we bring in some kind of initiative and activities which so far remain neglected, and bring in more biodiversity more into our space, more knowledge into our space. Can you also, for example, reward people and pay people? Like now you are paying a yoga teacher to come home and teach us. Why can't there are green warriors? Why can't there are green teachers who would come and teach us about how to make? That will be creating a new profession. No, yoga was not a professor 10 years back.
Oh, yes.
So maybe now just like interior designing, maybe someone is coming to your home and telling about what are the different trees to grow, how to grow these trees. Already there are some people doing it, but in a very small way. So I think how to take care of our surroundings, how to adopt a tree, how to interact with a park, how to go for a nature walk. I think whole new entrepreneurship and ideas and new kind of avocations are going to come, because this is becoming imperative. So this is not no more a choice, I think.
Oh yes. Yeah, and this is fabulous. I mean, I think a runaway entrepreneurial idea that Pranab just gave is, please have green warriors who can come home. We can have an app installed and we can book green warriors who can come and train us and teach us how to, do different kinds of balcony farming that we are getting into. Pranab, it's been fantastic having you with us today. You've really shed light on how community efforts, big and small, can make a lasting impact. Whether it's starting a community garden in a city or preserving a forest, it's clear that stewardship is something we can all contribute to in our own ways. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And to everyone listening out there, remember, every small step towards conservation counts. Until next time, let's keep cooling it down together. Thank you so much, Pranab, for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Now let's turn to someone who brings a deeply rooted perspective on these practices. But before that,
Dear listeners, you have a role to play in cooling it down. Please share your thoughts and suggestions about this podcast with just a mail away. Cool it down at in.bbcmediaaction.org or simply click the link in the descriptor of this episode. After all, we got to hashtag cool it down.
joining us today is our second guest, and he's very special, Mr. Dimgong. His work with Indigenous communities has been instrumental in preserving traditional stewardship practices. Mr. Dimgong, thank you for joining us. It's an honor to have you here. We're looking forward to hear your insights on the deep connection between Indigenous communities and nature.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mr. Dimgong, Indigenous communities have such a strong connection to nature. How do they build and maintain this bond over generations?
You know, Indigenous communities cultivate a profound connection with nature, grounded in a deep sense of interdependence. You know, respect and spiritual reverence for the environment.
Right.
You know, this bond is rooted in their understanding that the survival, well-being, and cultural identity are intrinsically linked to the land and its resources. You know, and for many Indigenous people, nature is not just a resources, but it is a divine entity. You know, and as sacred and alive, deserving, you know, of honor and stewardship. Practices such as sustainable farming, seasonal hunting, rituals honoring natural cycles reflect their commitment, you know, to living in a harmony with the environment. So, like, Indigenous communities often perceive nature as a manifestation of divine forces, with forests, rivers, mountains, and animals holding spiritual significance. For example, sacred groups are treated as holy sites, you know, symbolizing the sacred relationship between humans and nature. Or similarly, rituals like prayer offered to rivers or forests affirm the divine connection and seeking blessing for balance and abundance. So this sacred relationship with nature is transmitted through oral tradition, particularly storytellings and songs, and live experience, because there is no written practices, recording processes among the tribal people. So songs and storytelling is the most, you know, commonly practiced. So
right, and I want to come in here, Mr. Dimgong, because you're talking about stories and you're talking about the earlier practices, and exactly, you know, Indigenous knowledge is often passed down through stories and traditions. And how does this help communities face challenges like climate change?
Yeah. So now, if you look at across the globe, this rich biodiversity predominantly located in areas inhabited by Indigenous people. This is the, you know, best indicator I can say. So wherever tribal people, Indigenous people are there, rich biodiversity forests will be there.
What you just said about the rich biodiversity and Indigenous people is actually a fascinating evidence.
Yeah, and this is how Indigenous knowledge is holistic, integrating environmentally, social, spiritual dimension, and to, you know, practically adapt strategies for managing climatic variability. That's how I can, sense that.
So, Mr. Dimgong, you know, when we hear the stories and traditions of all the Indigenous communities, of course, back then they were not discussing about a challenge like climate change, a challenge that we are facing right now. So, how does that knowledge, the traditional knowledge and the Indigenous stories, how do they contribute in developing a perspective to tackle today's climate crises? Do these stories actually help us out in giving a direction of what to do and what not to do? Are there lessons that we can actually learn from these Indigenous communities and do something towards climate sustainability?
Definitely. Suppose, for example, when you listen to the stories, when you look to their, you know, songs, there are two things that we learned. One is the care. It is not mere. If when the indigenous people looking at the natural resources or the forest and the biodiversity, for them is the care, not just mere resources for commercial values. That is the first thing. And the second thing is traditional knowledge. How do they do that? So if you look at, say, one is how they respect natural resources. These are the principles that we can learn, using judiciously, avoid waste, and then promoting recycling. These are all. Then second thing is commons. Instead of privatization, the commons where people collectively work together, reserve together. For example, the traditional name like Rambo. Rambo is our traditional name for conservation of biodiversity and forests. Also circular economy practices, zero waste lifestyles, then stewardship on land. So these are, a few things that we can learn from these stories, and that would contribute to climate change mitigation, I believe.
And if I want you to identify those practices that we can learn in the urban environment, in the cities, those lessons which any person who's staying in an urban neighborhood can actually learn from indigenous stewardship, what are those three very important lessons that you'd like to highlight?
I see one thing which I would like to highlight. One is, considering these resources, natural resources, as source of life. That is one that definitely that I would like to mention. And other thing is, now commercialization. It is not commercialization what the community is talking about, and the kind of relationship they have with the forest. So it is their identity. That means their life itself. That is the second thing that I would like to share with. And all the culture. That the third thing is the way we live, the way they the festival that they have, the agriculture that they have is intertwined with the nature. So these are major three things that I would like to mention.
But Mr. Dimgong, I mean, you would agree on this that, the indigenous communities and the tribal communities, they have a very, very strong connection with nature. They take, birth with nature, in the lap of nature. They're so close. They open their eyes in the morning and they can see mountains, they can see forest, and they can see rivers. While the city life feels disconnected from nature, we do not get to see a mountain, we do not get to see a river. We are just surrounded with bricks and mortar. So it is difficult to have the same kind of relationship with nature. And I want to ask you this: how can we get young people excited about caring for their local environment in the urban landscape? Does cultural identity or community play a role in this?
Definitely. I think one of the things is that this culture and tradition, the care, knowledge, and institution among this indigenous community must be documented in a way. Maybe in terms of written book, or maybe videography, or whatever way it is. So we documented that and take this to schools, maybe high school, maybe college, and even forestry. So I used to say that our forestry is a colonial legacy. They are talking which are not really happening in many ways, which are not practical and realistic. So now from schools, we should start project-based learning, maybe real life applications, maybe role playing, maybe any other experiential approaches to understand, the natural ecosystems and how people live together, particularly in the context of indigenous community, in our educational framework in the urban area. So that is something that I strongly recommend.
Yeah. And I think, we at urban cities and towns, we should keep going back to, the indigenous communities and keep going back to the lap of nature in order to feel that connection. And I'm sure, once we go the mountain way, we will instantly feel connected. Mr. Dimgong, there's a lot of interest in combining traditional stewardship with new business ideas. There are so many budding entrepreneurs who are tuned in right now, who are listening to you. Can you give them an idea of how can indigenous principles inspire social enterprises? Do you have any ideas that you want people to turn it into their business?
Definitely. I think indigenous principles into social enterprise offers a powerful way to merge tradition with innovation. Innovation stewardship prioritizes sustainability, community well-being and equity, like foundational values for thriving social enterprise. For instance, business can integrate traditional ecological practices, which we talk about, the care, traditional knowledge,
Right.
and such as regenerative farming, develop eco-friendly products and all. Also, many applications include even in videography, in photography project, ecosystem restoration initiatives, or even entrepreneurial models, different entrepreneurs. Today, I'm talking about this itself, how, it's social enterprise, how entrepreneurs can have human touch and also, sustainable aspect of it in whatever business they do. So definitely this will help in sustaining human, in a sustainable manner.
Right.
As we try to, improve our economy.
Exactly. And I think, the deeper we think about how nature has always been there for us, I think, the connection is going to become even more stronger, and all these questions can be answered from a whole lot of wisdom from indigenous people. Mr. Dimgong, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Your perspective on the deep-rooted traditions of stewardship is incredibly inspiring, and it's clear that there is so much we can learn from indigenous wisdom. To everyone listening in right now, whether you are in the city or the countryside, there's always a way to connect with nature and make a difference. Thank you so much, Mr. Dimgong, for joining us today. Hey, thank you so much for hanging out with us on Cool It Down. Today's chat really got us thinking about how much we can learn from indigenous wisdom and sustainable practices. Honestly, it's a reminder that we all have a part to play in shaping a better future. So here is what I'm thinking. For us as individuals, we can start small. Take inspiration from the way indigenous communities live, respecting nature, making thoughtful, eco-conscious choices, and finding ways to give back to the planet. It doesn't have to be big. Even little changes add up. And if you're an entrepreneur out there listening, here is your challenge. Think about how your work can innovate responsibly. How can your products, services, or ideas align with sustainability? How can they empower communities while leaving a lighter footprint on the environment? Every step matters. So let's do this together. Share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Try one new action this week and keep the momentum going. That's it from me today. I'm Sayema, and I will see you soon, because the world needs a lot more ideas, a lot more guidance. And that's exactly what's coming your way in our next episodes of Cool It Down. Stick around.
Cool it down. Let's make it our business.